So Florida has a lot of different invasive lizard species, everything from the Nile monitor to the black and white tegu, and everyone's favorite, the green iguana. So what is being done in order to counteract all of these different invasive species, and why are so many of these giant lizards taking over Florida in the first place? Well, we're gonna start by going over some of these invasive lizards and try to figure out once and for all how we could try to fix this problem. So let's cue the intro and start talking about these incredibly harmful but also amazingly fascinating invasive dragons.
Removed more than 100 tegus in the Fort Pierce area so far, but anticipate there to be a lot more.
Eating gardens, getting into pools, even finding their way into toilets.
Since then, the iguana population on Miami Beach has been booming.
These iguanas are so fast and powerful that you just got a hold of my finger. It was a pretty bad bite.
Lieberman thought it was a prehistoric-looking creature, but experts weighed in.
It's not a Komodo dragon, it's not an alligator, it's either an Asian water monitor or it may be a Nile monitor.
So, Florida has a lot of invasive lizards, actually more invasive lizards than anywhere else in the world. While Florida only has 15 native species of lizard, the state is also home to over 67 invasives, ranging from the tokay gecko to the much larger lizards we're going to be talking about today. By far the most common and also most hated of these invasive giants is the green iguana. These lizards could get up to 6 feet long in some rare cases and are incredibly common all around South Florida, especially in more urban areas. While it is debated exactly how they originally got to Florida, most people believe it was entirely due to the pet trade. Though there is still a possibility that at least a few of these iguanas did originally come in from being blown off of storms and rafting out at sea until they eventually landed on the Florida coast. This would explain why so many iguanas were being sighted all the way back in the 1930s in Florida, way before the pet trade became so common, but at the same time genetic testing would prove that at least a few of these iguanas did originally come from pet owners keeping them in captivity, expecting them to stay small, but instead these iguanas, on top of being incredibly hormonal, definitely get a lot bigger than most people can handle. Even the smaller female green iguanas can still regularly get up to 3 feet long and can possibly even pull off a fingertip. Despite primarily being herbivorous, these iguanas definitely have some sharp teeth, to put it lightly. Again, despite their diet, they still do pose a serious threat to a lot of Florida's native wildlife. The main one being the fact that they have a very bad habit of taking up burrows from other native species, particularly that of gopher tortoises and burrowing owls. Plus, people absolutely hate these dragons as they have a bad habit of eating people's flowers and also pooping on people's lawns. But they aren't the only species of iguana that's invaded Florida. One species which is less hated and rarer, but actually probably more harmful to the ecosystem, is the Mexican black spiny-tailed iguana. Unlike the green iguana, which is mostly more herbivorous, the spiny-tailed iguana is way more omnivorous, with bird eggs playing a large part in its diet. And they certainly make up for their smaller size with an even stronger bite and definitely more of an attitude, though no iguana really poses a significant threat to people as long as you're not handling them. That seems to be a large misconception when it comes to all of these lizards, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But going back to the spiny-tailed iguana, thankfully, unlike their more common green cousins, these creatures are way more restricted in their range due to the fact that they aren't as cold tolerant as the green iguana, in addition to the fact that they lack the sort of genetic diversity that the green iguanas in Florida have. This is because unlike the green iguanas, which likely came here from multiple different release events in addition to possibly rafting, the spiny-tailed iguanas were likely a combination of only a few releases and escapes from pet stores. Overall, they're simply much less common in captivity, unlike the next lizard we're going to be talking about, which just so happens to be my favorite, the Argentine black and white tegu. Unlike the green or spiny-tailed iguana, the Argentine black and white tegu could actually make a really good pet for anyone who's experienced enough and has the space to take care of a large lizard like this. That is because unlike most other large lizards, the tegus seem to be much more lazy and tend to tame down a lot more easily. They also have a much wider range in diet than the other large lizards and are also more cold tolerant. This makes them slightly better pets, but also even worse of an invasive species. On top of eating eggs and fruits, these creatures will eat pretty much anything that they could catch, ranging from small birds, mammals, and even baby crocodilians. Plus, just like the iguanas, these creatures have a very bad habit of using the burrows of other native species, such as gopher tortoise, and of course the burrowing owl. Though unlike the iguanas, these guys will actually eat those animals too sometimes. Additionally, not just do sightings of these creatures go much farther north, but they've even been sighted all the way up in Ocala, where there's a current breeding population, and there's even been reports of them surviving all the way up in Georgia, where it could get a lot cooler than what these other giant invasive lizards are accustomed to down south. Still, overall, tegus seem to be much more cryptic and elusive than the iguanas that are currently invading Florida, with most of the tegus sighted mainly being found in more wilderness areas, compared to the more urban canals in which the iguanas have taken over. This also further contributes to the tegus being even harder to capture, as they're way more elusive than the green iguanas. Because of this, outside of sensational news articles, the tegus mostly go under the radar, compared to the iguanas in which people complain about all the damn time. Also, at one point, these tegus did have a huge benefit to our economy, but I'll get to that later in the video. By the way, if you've made it this far, then please feel free to like and subscribe, because I try to make mini animal documentaries every single week, and in order to do that, I need all of your AdSense money. So getting back to the tegus, the Argentine black and white tegu isn't the only species of tegu that has been introduced to Florida. The much less common golden tegu has also been reported throughout our state, though breeding populations of this species has yet to be confirmed, unlike their very close relative, the amoeba, also known as the jungle runner. No, not those kinds of jungle runners, but these. The giant amoeba and its close relative, the dusky giant amoeba, have already taken over both Miami-Dade and Broward County. And while they only get up to 3 feet long, they are becoming increasingly common in urban areas, though they're a lot harder to catch because unlike the tegus, these South American lizards are built for speed. Despite these lizards being present in the state ever since the 1950s, their population hasn't exploded until very recently, where now they could be found throughout multiple different cities and towns, both eating people's gardens and the pests that inhabit these gardens. I've actually even caught a few of these mini tegus myself, and they're absolutely gorgeous. But every single lizard so far still pales in comparison to Florida's largest invasive dragon, the Nile monitor. The Nile monitor lizard is pretty much exclusive in its range in Florida to only Palm Beach and Lee County. In turn though, this is the only one of Florida's invasive lizards to actually have venom and actually get up to 7 feet long. In other words, they're probably the hardest of all of Florida's dragons to capture. They're also one of the most elusive, being highly intelligent and mostly living exclusively around a few canals. On top of that, these lizards are not just terrestrial, but also semi-arboreal and semi-aquatic, meaning that these guys could be found in the water and in the trees, on top of being found around these canals. In other words, the Nile monitor is definitely one of Florida's most adaptive invasive reptiles, and they'll eat almost anything ranging from eggs to birds and your little pet Fluffy if you don't keep him in a cage. But don't worry, these lizards are not a threat to people despite what the news says, and with so many people trying to constantly catch these lizards, their range has stayed relatively the same over the past few years, meaning that your odds of seeing these creatures are incredibly low. Honestly, unless you're trying to catch them, these lizards are pretty much harmless, especially compared to the Florida traffic. But technically a Nile monitor bite could still be very severe, so I do not recommend catching these guys unless if you're a professional. After all, people did release these guys in addition to other monitor lizard species for a reason. That being the fact that most people probably didn't feel like they could safely take care of these lizards due to their large sharp claws and razor sharp teeth. By the way, the Nile monitor, while the only species of monitor that's been confirmed to be breeding in Florida, is far from the only monitor that has been sighted in the Florida wilderness. Savannah, blackthroat, and especially the Asian water monitor have all been found in the state of Florida multiple times, though all of these individuals are likely either individual releases or pet escapes, so you don't need to worry about these giant lizards becoming established anytime soon. Hopefully. Okay, and that should be all of Florida's giant invasive oh yeah, wait. I almost forgot about the brown basilisk. The brown basilisk, also known as the Jesus Christ lizard, is that same creature you've probably seen on Nat Geo Wild 1,000 times running on water. Except the brown variety is not as pretty. Still, the brown basilisk shares its incredibly unique crest and sail with its more gorgeous green counterpart. though these features are way more prominent in the males of both species. Unlike the other lizards I mentioned in this video, the brown basilisk could only get up to about 3 feet long, and while they're by far the most prevalent in Palm Beach County, they've recently been spreading like wildfire, and will likely become just as abundant as the green iguana within the next few years. Okay, and I think that should be all of them. So what's going to be done about all of these giant invasive lizards, and what can we even do in the first place in order to solve this problem? Well, FWC originally thought that simply just banning these reptiles in captivity would solve the whole issue. And while most of these reptiles were originally introduced at least in part due to the pet trade, the banning of these invasive reptiles has seemingly only made things worse. While that might sound odd, believe it or not everyone who keeps pet reptiles is absolutely insane. A lot of people actually do truly care about their pets, even if their pet is, well, a giant lizard. So when this ban eventually did take place, what happened was that a lot of these different lizard species, particularly the green iguana and all tegus species, were required to get a tracker implant within 90 days of the ban, or else they would be euthanized. And naturally, a lot of people weren't checking the laws until they realized it was already too late. The same also applied to a lot of Florida's large snakes, and to put it lightly, this ban was very chaotic. Because of the fear a lot of people had of their pets being euthanized, a lot of different pet species were released, some of which weren't even invasive to Florida, but are still definitely more than capable of surviving out in the wild, and possibly starting a breeding population in the future. Some of these new species that were recently discovered out in the Florida wilderness include the reticulated python and the red tegu, both of which started appearing just after the ban. Also, the establishment of this law also made it illegal for people to sell some of these non-native species out of state, which, while this might seem like a good idea on paper, it actually turns out a lot of people would end up making profit by capturing these invasive species and selling them out of state prior to the ban, particularly with the tegus, which even after being in the wild for generations still seem to be able to tame down relatively easily. So to put it lightly, this ban was an absolute disaster and possibly even contributed to there now being even more invasive giant lizards and giant snakes out in Florida. So what sort of things have actually been done that have been proven to help with Florida's giant invasive reptile problem? Well, believe it or not, a lot of these simple trap and capture programs have actually been proven to be quite successful, particularly on the Nile monitor and the black and white tegu. With both of these giant lizards, a lot of people have been setting up baited cage traps in areas where these animals have been reported. And while these traps aren't always successful, they have helped to significantly reduce the amount of Nile monitors and tegus within the places where they are placed. A lot of people will even go as far as to credit these programs for being one of the main reasons why the Nile monitor and black and white tegu haven't been able to spread nearly as far as some of the iguanas have, which are more often than not captured by hand. A lot of people also agree that these trapping programs are way more ethical than a lot of the iguana removal programs, which can range from people simply just capturing these iguanas by hand to people straight up shooting them with bow and arrows. It is important to keep in mind, while these lizards might be invasive, they are still wild animals, and they didn't choose to be here. It was our own human ignorance that placed these creatures in this situation, and the best we could do is try to learn more about them so we could figure out how to prevent the spread of a lot of these different species in the future. What I think is more important isn't that we try to all out ban these creatures from being in captivity, nor should we all try to shoot these often wonderful creatures out of trees with bow and arrows and spears. Instead, what we should try to do is focus on the methods of removing these creatures ethically that are working, such as placing traps around canals where some of these animals might frequent, and also finding more ways to encourage people to make money ethically by removing these animals, if it's by selling these creatures to other states or by using their skins to create purses and other makeshift goods. And don't get me wrong, while not everyone should be able to own their own pet mini dragon, by all out making it impossible to get these creatures, all you're doing is creating a black market for some of these potentially dangerous future invasive animals. Instead, what we should do is try to work to create a permitting system which ensures that only the most responsible of pet keepers are able to keep these giant lizards. After all, the last thing we need is someone getting scared and deciding to release their pet crocodile monitor out of fear that's gonna get euthanized. By the way, this is what their teeth look like. Overall, while the idea of removing every one of Florida's invasive dragons is essentially impossible, it's still possible that we could continue to minimize the spread and damage that these creatures cause. Already, thanks to constant removal programs, the Nile monitor lizard's population has already been on the decline for a while now. And if we could decrease their numbers, and I don't see why we can't do that with other species as well. What matters is just that we put the effort in an ethical and reasonable way. And while we probably won't ever be able to remove all of these different species successfully due to the sheer size of Florida alone, we probably will be able to decrease our numbers if we do everything right. And over time, hopefully with a bit of luck, nature can adapt. Now, if you enjoyed this video, then you know what to do. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you real soon. Goodbye. By the way, before you click off of the video, I just found one of these Florida dragons right here. I'm nicknaming him Scrumptious.
Maybe it is better this way. We hurt each other with the things we
He's adorable. Like and subscribe.